The cathedral bell does not command, it exhales. Its heavy iron toll ripples across the valley, not as a summons to the loom or the mill, but as a benediction of silence. Listen to the vibration as it settles into the bones of the earth. For the man standing knee-deep in the frozen mire of the north field, that sound is a mercy. He stops. The wood of the plow, polished smooth by a lifetime of friction and sweat, is suddenly cold. Dead weight that he is permitted, by divine law, to let fall. He unyokes the oxen, his movements slow and reverent. The beast's breath rises in thick silver plumes, ghost-like against the bruised purple of a winter dusk. There is a strange, jarring quiet that follows the cessation of labor. To the modern ear, a day without work is a choice. To the medieval soul, it is a fortress. And this is the feast of St. Nicholas, and within the shadow of the parish spire, the law is absolute. The earth must sleep so the soul may wake. To strike a hammer or turn a furrow today would not just be a crime against the crown, but a rupture in the very fabric of the cosmos. He rubs his calloused palms together, the friction releasing the sharp scent of damp wool, animal musk, and the sour, metallic tang of turned soil. For a few heartbeats, he stands perfectly still, feeling the lightness of his own hands. They are no longer instruments of the manor, no longer extensions of the Lord's will or the king's greed. In this sacred pause, the peasant is reclaimed. He is a father, a neighbor, a man of clay and spirit, belonging only to the deepening silence of the frost. But as the light fails and the first stars pierce the cold velvet of the sky, this newfound freedom carries a different weight. The silence is beautiful, yes, but it is also a void. Without the rhythm of the plow, the mind begins to wander into the shadows of the coming year, to the grain stores that dwindle with every passing moon, and the cold that waits just beyond the door. The rest is a gift, but in the medieval world, every gift from the heavens is shadowed by a question of survival. As he turns toward the flickering orange glow of the village fires, he wonders if the soul can truly feast when the body knows the winter is only just beginning. The hearth does not merely burn, it breathes, a low rhythmic pulse of amber that defies the encroaching iron of a midwinter night. Gold light spills through the splintered cracks of a timber barn, catching the frantic dance of dust motes that swirl like tiny, forgotten stars in the rafters. Outside, the world is locked in a frozen stasis, but inside, there is a mounting, quiet electricity. This is the eve of the great stillness. There is no ticking clock to fracture the peace here, only the slow, deliberate lengthening of the oak tree's shadow across the frosted yard, and the ancient knowledge that the sun has reached its lowest ebb. A woman sits by the fire, her hands finally, unnervingly still. She sets aside her spindle, the constant mechanical hum of her industry silenced by the sacred decree of the liturgical calendar. For 300 days, her life has been a relentless loop of wool, water, and wheat. But tonight, the cycle breaks. 12 days of Christmastide stretch before her, not as a mere holiday, but as a vast, white wilderness of time. It is a sovereign territory where the only duty is to exist. Here, the dictates of the manor vanish into the wood smoke. She reaches for a heel of dark bread, the crust hard and comforting, and a cup of small ale that tastes of yeast and summer's ghost. In this drafty cottage, beneath a roof of rotting thatch, she possesses something a king might envy, the right to be idle. She watches the embers die down, tracing the glowing topography of the coals. In her poverty, she discovers a hidden wealth of hours, a sprawling, an unhurried landscape of the mind that the modern world has long since bartered away for coin and glass. It is a period of radical grace, where the body is allowed to heal and the spirit is permitted to drift. Yet, even as the warmth of the ale settles in her blood, she knows this sanctuary is fragile. The 12 days are a bridge, not a destination. Beyond the flickering light of the hearth, the deep winter is watching, waiting for the fire to turn to ash. Even in this deepest rest, the wheel of the year is already beginning its slow, heavy turn toward the labor of the spring and the first hints of a hunger that no feast can truly satisfy. The scent of crushed thyme and rosemary drifts from the churchyard like a fragrant prayer, heavy and sweet in the stagnant air. Above, the llama's sun hangs like a molten coin, its blinding heat pressing down upon the yellowed fields. But for once, the rhythmic shushing of the harvest has ceased. In the long, cool shadows of the tithe barn, the scythes are laid to rest. Their curved blades, usually symbols of unyielding toil, gleam in the dimness like fallen crescent moons, silver, silent, and momentarily harmless. For today, the crushing weight of the harvest is interrupted by a mandated grace, a sanctuary of time carved out from the peak of the world's labor. It is the day of the first fruits, a celebration of loaves and communal song that blurs the sharp edges of a jagged social order. Here, in the golden haze of the village green, the rigid hierarchy of serf and master softens, yielding to the gravity of a shared feast. The Lord's wine flows into the same sun-cracked vessels as the peasant's ale, and for a few fleeting hours, the chains of feudal duty are replaced by the lifting of voices. A young boy, his skin usually mapped with the grime of the furrows, sits against the cool moss of the church wall. He traces the ancient, swirling carvings on a stone lintel, his small hands finally free of the stinging grain dust that usually chokes his lungs and clouds his vision. He does not know the tally of his days, nor the economic cost of his idleness. He only knows that the bells have granted him the impossible freedom to simply watch the hawks circle an unburdened sky. But as the shadows begin to stretch, and the crumbs of the blessed bread are swept away, in a subtle shift chills the air. The laughter remains, but it is thinner now, echoing against the stone. The boy looks from the circling hawks back to the scythes, resting in the dark, realizing that this reprieve is not a release, but a pause, a deep breath taken before the final, grueling push of the reaping. The sun is setting on the feast, and as the orange light catches the dust of the road, the village begins to remember that the earth is a jealous creditor. Tomorrow, the iron will return to their hands, and the sweetness of the rosemary will be replaced by the acrid, familiar smell of smoke and exhaustion. The rain does not merely fall. It lashes the earth with a rhythmic, percussive fury, turning the village lanes into a treacherous slurry of gray mud and crushed bone. Beyond the dripping eaves of the thatch, the world is a drowning landscape of gray and iron. Yet as the storm howls, a different kind of power settles within the sanctuary of the alehouse. Here, the air is a thick, golden haze of roasting salt pork and the sweet, stinging bite of wood smoke. Today, the Lord's bailiff is silent. The fields are abandoned to the deluge, for this is a fallow day, one of the many sacred gaps in the calendar dictated by the shifting tides of the saints. It is a mandatory reprieve, a sudden stillness in a life usually defined by the relentless, grinding gravity of the manor. A veteran laborer, and his skin as etched and weathered as the bark of an ancient yew, leans his back against the rough-hewn timber of the wall. You can almost hear the soft, internal protest of his joints as his spine finally uncurls, from the perpetual aching hunch of the hoe. His hands, scarred by decades of flint and frost, wrap around the rough ceramic of a mug. There is a sacred stubbornness in this collective rest. It is more than mere idleness. It is a communal refusal to let the body break before the spirit has had its fill of peace. In this dim, flickering warmth, the very concept of time begins to dissolve. It is no longer measured by the frantic production of grain or the counting of coins for a distant crown, but by the slow, amber steadying of a shared cup and the low murmur of voices recounting the legends of old. But even as the fire crackles, a shadow lingers at the edge of the hearth's reach. The laborer knows that this stillness is a fragile shield. The world outside is growing colder, and the rain that grants them rest today is the same water that can rot the seed in the furrow tomorrow. As the wind rattles the heavy oak door, a reminder of the fragility of their sanctuary, the laughter in the room feels more like a defiance than a celebration. They are resting not because the work is finished, but because they are human, and even the strongest iron must eventually seek the heat of the forge to survive what is coming next. A single piercing note from a bone pipe shatters the morning mist, followed by the frantic, earthy thump of a tabor. It is a sound that signals a temporary death, the death of toil. The village green, usually a place of mud and transit, transforms into a tapestry of vivid wools and swirling movement. This is the wake of a local martyr, a name carved into the parish memory, and by ancient custom, the gears of the world must cease their grinding. The looms sit silent in the cottages, their warp and weft frozen. The charcoal pits are left to cool into ash, their choking black smoke replaced by the scent of roasting meat and trampled grass. In the center of this burgeoning chaos stands a girl, her hands moving with a lightness that feels almost alien. Her fingers, usually stained to the knuckles with the deep, yet stubborn indigo of the dye vat, are now scrubbed clean, smelling of soft rainwater and crushed mint. She braids ribbons of crimson and flaxen yellow into her hair, a small, quiet act of rebellion against the drab reality of her station. She moves through this world as if walking through a dream, where the sun's slow, golden arc across the sky is the only ledger that matters. There are no quotas to meet today, no master to shadow her footsteps with the threat of the lash or the fine. This is the peasant's hidden inheritance, a treasure buried beneath the soil they till, a calendar stitched together with moments of mandatory joy. These festivals are not mere suggestions. They are sacred anchors that keep the soul from being swept away by the current of endless labor. They are sanctuaries of leisure carved out of a life of stone. As the girl joins the circle of dancers, her feet drumming against the earth that usually demands her sweat, she feels the strange, heady power of belonging to herself. Yet, as the music reaches its crescendo and the cider begins to sting the throat, a somber shadow flits across the green. The village priest watches from the church porch, his hand resting on the heavy iron key of the sanctuary. He knows, as they all do, that this joy is a borrowed garment. For every hour spent in the sun, there is a darkness waiting to reclaim its due. The music is loud, but it cannot entirely drown out the sound of the wind whispering through the cemetery yews, a reminder that while the feast is grand, the fast is never far behind, and the silence of the soul is often bought with the hunger of the belly. The water wheel groans one final shuddering time before falling into a silence deeper than sleep. It is a hollow, haunting sound, the absence of the thunderous friction that usually defines the valley's pulse. As the Lenten shadows stretch their long, skeletal fingers across the riverbank, the work of the mill comes to a definitive, grinding halt. The dust of the grain, usually a choking fog, begins to settle, coating the floor in a pale, ghostly shroud. The air, once thick with the roar of industry, is suddenly reclaimed by the distant, mournful cry of a crow and the cold, persistent rush of the meltwater. The miller stands on the narrow wooden bridge, his white dusted hands resting idle upon the damp rail. These hands, usually stained with the frantic greasiness of the axle and the grit of the stone, are now curiously light. For the next 40 days, the world will contract. The frantic pace of survival, the desperate race to grind the winter's remaining store, yields to the slow, heavy rhythm of penance. This is a time of subtraction, where the belly goes empty so the mind might clear. There is a strange, rugged dignity in this forced stillness. It is a collective, societal recognition that the human frame was never built for the endless, mechanical grind of the wheel. Like the fields themselves, the spirit requires a season of frost to find its strength again. He looks toward the horizon, where the church spire pierces the rising evening mist like a needle of gray stone, anchoring his life to a cycle that honors the soul's fundamental need to simply exist. In the medieval mind, time is not a commodity to be spent, but a cathedral to be inhabited. Yet, as the purple twilight deepens, the stillness carries a sharper edge. Reflection is a luxury, but it is also a mirror that reveals the cracks in one's armor. Standing there in the deepening cold, the miller feels the weight of the coming fast, the realization that the body, though rested, must soon endure the leanest months of the year. The silence of the mill is a peace, but it is a fragile one. For as the sun vanishes, he knows that the warmth of the spring is still a long, dark walk away, and the fires of the forge are waiting to be relit. When the Whitsun bells begin to ring, they do not carry the harsh clangor of a warning or the heavy toll of a funeral. Instead, they carry the sweet, heady scent of blossoming hawthorn and the promise of a world unchained. The sound ripples across the meadows, a golden vibration that signals the end of the long, penitential climb toward summer. For 7 days, the iron grip of the manor relaxes. The dust of the road is left to settle. The plow is abandoned in the tall grass, and the village breathes. It is a week of sudden, startling mercy, a reprieve bought not with coin, but with the ancient, sacred right to be still. In the center of the village, the elders sit upon weathered stone benches, their gnarled fingers intertwined like the roots of the oaks they rest beneath. They watch with watery, yet reflective eyes as the youth dance upon the green, their shadows lengthening until the first shy stars emerge from the velvet blue of the dusk. These men and women have survived the lean, skeletal months of late winter, and their reward is the gift of unhurried time, a commodity far more precious than the Lord's silver or the king's favor. There is no frantic rush to beat the rain, no fear of the failing light. There is only the presence of the moment, thick and sweet as mountain honey. In the shadows of his smithy, a blacksmith watches his forge fire die down to a soft, pulsing red. He feels the searing, perpetual heat leave his face for the first time in months, replaced by the cool, floral breath of the evening. His soot-stained arms, thick with the scars of 1,000 sparks, hang loosely at his sides. He understands what the modern world has forgotten, that in the medieval mind, the heart must be allowed to catch up to the body. To work without ceasing is to lose the self. To rest is to reclaim the soul from the clay. He watches the last ember fade into gray ash, knowing that while the fire will surely return, he is no longer a ghost haunting his own labor. He is a man, whole and free, standing in a silence that belongs entirely to him.